What secret did your aunt take to their grave? The brass key felt ice cold between my fingers as I stood in the sterile silence of First National Bank's vault room. Box 847. Aunt Margaret had hidden this key so well that I'd almost missed it, taped inside the spine of her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, discovered only because I'd knocked the book off her nightstand while packing up her bedroom 3 days after the funeral. Take your time, Ms. Chen, the bank employee said, sliding the narrow metal box across the table before retreating to give me privacy. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light that made my hands look ghostly pale. I'd expected maybe some old jewelry, perhaps a few savings bonds. Aunt Margaret had always been secretive about money, living modestly in her small ranch house despite Uncle Richard's obvious wealth. She'd raised me after Mom died when I was 12, never married, never had kids of her own. I thought I knew everything about her. The box opened with a soft click. Inside, manila folders were stacked with military precision, each labeled in Margaret's careful handwriting. Trust documents 2018 to 2023. Bank transfers, Cayman account. Medical bills, David Chin. My breath caught. David Chin. My father. I pulled out the thickest folder with trembling hands. The first document was a photocopy of the original family trust, established by my grandfather in 1987. The trust was supposed to provide for all descendants' medical expenses, education, and emergencies. I remembered this trust. It was why Uncle Richard had assured us that Dad's cancer treatment would be fully covered. Why we'd never applied for financial aid. Why Dad had chosen the expensive experimental treatment at Johns Hopkins instead of the standard chemotherapy. But as I flipped through page after page of bank statements, transfer records, and meticulously documented transactions, a horrifying picture emerged. Starting in 2019, just 2 months after Dad's diagnosis, someone had been systematically draining the trust. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Payments to shell companies. Fake invoices for non-existent business expenses. All authorized by Richard Chin, trustee. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. Dad had died in September 2021, not because the experimental treatment failed, but because we'd run out of money to continue it. The medical bills from Johns Hopkins were right here, $847,000 still outstanding when Dad died. Bills that should have been paid by the trust that Richard was supposed to manage. Bills that could have been paid if Richard hadn't stolen over $2 million. At the bottom of the folder was a letter addressed to me in Margaret's handwriting, dated just 3 weeks ago. My dearest Sarah. Asterisk if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found what I never had the courage to show you while I was alive. I've been investigating Richard for 4 years, ever since David started asking why the trust payments were being delayed. By the time I gathered enough evidence, it was too late to save your father. I'll never forgive myself for that, asterisk. Asterisk, but it's not too late to stop Richard from stealing from other families. The Hartwell Trust, the Morrison Foundation, he's on the board of 6 different charitable organizations. This pattern of theft goes back over a decade, asterisk. Asterisk, I'm a coward, Sarah. I couldn't bear to tear our family apart, even to get justice for David. But you're stronger than I ever was. You're like your father, you never let injustice stand, asterisk. The choice is yours now. All my love. Aunt Margaret. I sat back in the hard plastic chair, surrounded by evidence of betrayal so massive it made me dizzy. Uncle Richard, who'd spoken so movingly at Dad's funeral about family bonds and tragic loss. Who'd hugged me and whispered that Dad was in a better place now. He'd killed my father as surely as if he'd put a gun to his head. The second folder was labeled personal correspondence in Margaret's neat script. Inside, I found printed emails dating back to 2019, all between Richard and someone named Marcus Delacroix at Bermuda International Holdings. The subject lines made my stomach turn: Q3 trust disbursement, educational fund reallocation, medical emergency transfer urgent. They were discussing my father's death like a quarterly earnings report. Asterisk Marcus, need to expedite the Baltimore withdrawal. David's treatments are accelerating faster than projected. Can we route another $340K through the Singapore account by Friday? R asterisk. Asterisk Richard, Baltimore transfer complete. Paperwork shows full disbursement to Johns Hopkins as requested. Your nephew will never know the funds actually cleared through our Hong Kong subsidiary first. Commission deposited as usual. M asterisk. I had to read that twice. Richard hadn't just stolen from the trust, he'd made it look like Dad's medical bills were being paid while actually funneling the money to his business partner. Dad died thinking his treatment was too experimental, too expensive, that he was bankrupting the family. He'd actually asked the doctors to stop treatment 2 weeks before he died. I can't do this to Sarah, I remembered him whispering to Margaret in the hospital corridor. She'll have nothing left. But there had been money. Millions of dollars that should have saved his life. The next folder contained something even worse, a complete financial breakdown of Richard's theft spanning 12 years. Margaret had tracked every transaction with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. The Patterson Children's Hospital Fund, $890,000 diverted to Richard's real estate investments. The Riverside Scholarship Foundation, $1.2 million filtered through fake consulting fees. The St. Mary's Emergency Relief Fund, $675,000 transferred to Richard's personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note from Margaret dated 6 months ago, called Patterson Hospital today. They had to close the pediatric wing last year due to funding shortfalls. 37 children transferred to County Hospital. 2 died waiting for surgeries. Richard hadn't just killed my father. He'd been murdering people for over a decade. My phone buzzed with a text message. Uncle Richard, asterisk Sarah, honey, can we meet for lunch tomorrow? Want to discuss your dad's memorial scholarship. I have some exciting news about the funding, asterisk. I stared at the message, remembering how Richard had announced the scholarship at Dad's funeral. David Chin Memorial Fund for Cancer Research, he'd called it, with tears streaming down his face. We'll make sure his death saves other lives. The whole family had applauded. I'd hugged him and thanked him for honoring Dad's memory. Now I realized it was probably just another shell account for Richard to plunder. I scrolled through my phone to Richard's contact information. Uncle Rich, with a photo of him and Dad at last year's 4th of July barbecue, both of them laughing over beers. Dad had called Richard his best friend, the brother he'd always wanted. Richard was Dad's best man at his wedding to Mom. He'd been at the hospital when I was born. And he'd watched my father die knowing he could have saved him with a single phone call. The bank vault's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across Margaret's evidence. I could hear muffled conversations from the lobby, normal people conducting normal business. But sitting in this sterile room surrounded by proof of such calculated cruelty, the ordinary world felt impossibly far away. I pulled out my phone and started typing a response to Richard's text, then stopped. Margaret had spent 4 years gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment that never came. But I wasn't Margaret. And I wasn't going to wait. I typed and deleted 3 different responses to Richard's text before settling on something that wouldn't reveal my hand, sure, Uncle Rich. 1 p.m. at Romano's, the casual tone felt like swallowing glass, but I needed time to plan. His response came immediately, perfect. Can't wait to tell you about the memorial fund. Your dad would be so proud, The audacity was breathtaking. I screenshot the message and added it to a new folder on my phone labeled evidence. The third folder in Margaret's safety deposit box was thinner but somehow felt heavier in my hands. Current assets RC was written on the tab in red ink. Inside were recent bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, property deeds, and what looked like a private investigator's report dated just 2 months ago. Richard Chin owned a $3.2 million mansion in Martha's Vineyard that he'd never mentioned to the family. A ski lodge in Aspen worth $1.8 million. A yacht called Family First, I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming, moored in Miami and valued at $950,000. The private investigator's photos showed Richard and a woman I didn't recognize sunbathing on the deck, champagne glasses in hand. According to the report, the woman was Elena Vasquez, a 34-year-old art dealer from Barcelona. They'd been together for 3 years, spending winters in her apartment overlooking the Mediterranean and summers sailing the Caribbean. There were receipts for jewelry purchases totaling $127,000, all charged to something called the Chin Family Emergency Fund. While Dad was rationing his pain medication to save money, Richard was buying his girlfriend diamond earrings with stolen funds. But the document that made my vision blur with rage was tucked behind the private investigator's photos. A medical consultation report from the Mayo Clinic dated October 15, 2021, 3 weeks after Dad's funeral. Richard had undergone a full executive physical, the kind that costs $25,000 and includes every test known to medical science. The consultation note, signed by Dr. Helena Morrison, included a handwritten addendum. Patient expressed anxiety about family history of cancer following recent loss of brother. Discussed preventive measures and early detection strategies. Patient approved for annual executive screening program. Cost, $40,000 annually, charged to Chin Medical Trust as agreed. He was using Dad's death, the death he'd caused, to justify stealing even more money for his own medical care. My phone rang, making me jump. Margaret's lawyer, Patricia Wong. Sarah, I'm glad I caught you. I've been going through your aunt's papers, and I found something odd. There's a second will. What do you mean, a second will? The will we probated left everything to you, which stands. But there's an older document from 2019 that mentions specific instructions for materials held in trust for David Chin's memory. Do you know what that might refer to? I looked at the folder spread across the bank table. I think I do. There's something else. Margaret had scheduled an appointment with me for next Tuesday. She'd marked it as urgent legal action required, but didn't specify details. Her assistant said she'd seemed very anxious about it, mentioned needing to finally do right by David. The timing hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had been planning to expose Richard. She'd finally found the courage, but died 5 days too soon. Ms. Wong, I said carefully, what would be the statute of limitations on trust fund embezzlement? There was a pause. That's a very specific question, Sarah. Is there something I should know about? I stared at the photo of Richard and Elena on his yacht, their faces radiant with happiness purchased with blood money. In the background, I could make out the boat's registration number and home port, Miami-Dade County, the same jurisdiction mentioned in several of Richard's shell company filings. I need to see you tomorrow morning, I said. Before my lunch appointment. And Patricia? We're going to need a criminal defense attorney on retainer. Sarah, what exactly did your aunt leave you? I gathered Margaret's folders, my hand steady now with purpose. Justice. After hanging up with Patricia, I sat in the vault's silence for another 20 minutes, memorizing every detail of Margaret's investigation. But it was the fourth folder that made my blood run cold, labeled simply Family Tree in Margaret's careful script. Inside were genealogy records going back 3 generations, but these weren't the usual birth certificates and marriage licenses. Margaret had mapped out every trust, foundation, and inheritance connected to our extended family. The Chin family tree looked like a financial flowchart, with Richard's name appearing as trustee, board member, or executor on dozens of accounts. My cousin Jennifer's college fund, depleted in 2018, the same year she'd had to drop out of Stanford and take out student loans. The Morrison Family Medical Trust that should have covered Grandpa Morrison's Alzheimer's care, drained in 2020, forcing him into a state facility instead of the private memory care center we thought was being paid for through the trust. Even the annual family reunion fund had been systematically emptied, which explained why Richard always made such a show of personally covering the costs. But the document that made my hands shake was a copy of Mom's life insurance policy from 2011. When she died, the $500,000 payout was supposed to go into an education trust for me, managed by Richard until I turned 25. I turned 28 last month and had never seen a penny. According to Margaret's records, Richard had borrowed against the policy in 2012 to cover emergency family expenses, then dissolved the trust entirely in 2015, transferring the remaining $380,000 to his Cayman Islands account. The paperwork showed my forged signature authorizing the transfer, a signature from when I was supposedly 21, though I would have been only 19 at the time. He'd been stealing from me for over a decade. I called Patricia back. I need to ask you something, and I need you to check your records carefully. When my mother died in 2011, was there supposed to be an education trust? The silence stretched long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. Sarah, Patricia's voice was tight. Your aunt asked me that exact same question 6 months ago. I told her what I'm telling you. Richard handled your mother's estate through a different firm. Said it would be simpler for family matters. What firm? Delacroix, Martinez and Associates. But Sarah, I looked them up after Margaret called. They dissolved in 2016. All records sealed due to an FBI investigation into financial fraud. The room started spinning. Marcus Delacroix, the same name from Richard's emails about Dad's medical payments. Richard hadn't just stolen from the family trusts, he'd been working with a criminal law firm to forge documents and hide assets for years. My phone buzzed with another text from Richard, *actually, let's make it dinner instead of lunch. Thought you might enjoy Lou Bernardine, celebrating the scholarship fund reaching $100,000. Your dad would be so proud, $100,000. Dad's memorial fund contained less money than Richard spent on his girlfriend's jewelry. I screenshot the message and started a new note on my phone, typing furiously, timeline Richard's lies. Lou Bernardine meant Manhattan, which meant Richard was in the city. According to Margaret's private investigator notes, he kept an apartment on the Upper East Side under Elena's name, another property purchased with stolen funds. But as I typed, something else clicked into place. Tomorrow was Thursday, October 12th. According to one of the bank statements, Richard made his largest Cayman Islands transfers on the 15th of every month, a pattern Margaret had documented going back 5 years. If he was planning to celebrate the memorial fund reaching $100,000, he was probably preparing to steal it. I had less than 72 hours before Dad's memorial money disappeared into Richard's offshore accounts. I gathered all the folders and stood up, my decision crystallizing with each heartbeat. Margaret had waited 4 years for the right moment and died before she could act. But I had something she didn't, I had nothing left to lose. Richard had already destroyed my family. He'd killed my father, stolen my mother's legacy, and robbed my cousins of their futures. The family I'd been afraid to tear apart had been destroyed years ago, I just hadn't known it yet. Time to show Uncle Rich what kind of woman Margaret had raised. The elevator to Patricia's law office felt like it was moving through molasses. I'd spent the entire night going through Margaret's evidence, cross-referencing dates and amounts until my eyes burned. By 3 a.m., I'd built a timeline that painted Richard not just as a thief, but as someone who'd been methodically destroying our family for over 15 years. Sarah, you look terrible, Patricia said when I walked into her office at 9 a.m. sharp. Did you sleep at all? I set Margaret's folders on her mahogany desk with a heavy thud. Patricia, I need you to tell me everything you know about Richard's role in our family's finances. And I mean everything. She opened the first folder, and I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing. The bank transfers, the forged documents, the systematic theft spanning more than a decade. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror to something that looked like professional fury. Jesus Christ, Sarah. This is... She flipped through page after page of evidence. This is RICO-level fraud. How long has Margaret been investigating this? 4 years. But I think it goes back much further. I pulled out a document I'd found tucked in the very back of the last folder. Look at this. It was a copy of our grandfather's original will from 1987, with handwritten notes in the margins in Margaret's careful script. Grandpa had left everything in trust specifically because he didn't trust Richard with money. There were multiple clauses requiring co-trustees and external auditing. But sometime in 1995, Richard had petitioned the court to modify the trust structure, claiming it was too cumbersome for modern financial management. Margaret noted that she never received notice of that court hearing, I said, pointing to her handwritten comment. Neither did Dad or any of the other beneficiaries. Richard filed in Nassau County Family Court, not here in Suffolk where Grandpa lived. Patricia was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling Judge Morrison. She handles trust disputes and she's not going to like what she sees here. She paused, fingers hovering over the keypad. Sarah, once we make this call, there's no going back. Richard will know you've discovered everything. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Unknown number with a Miami area code. Sarah Chen? The voice was professional but cautious. This is Detective Maria Santos with Miami-Dade Financial Crimes Division. I understand you've recently come into possession of some documents that might be relevant to an ongoing investigation. My blood went cold. I'm sorry, what investigation? Ma'am, I can't discuss details over the phone, but we've been building a case involving offshore accounts and charitable fraud for the past 18 months. Your Aunt Margaret contacted us 6 weeks ago about potential evidence, but... She paused. We were sorry to hear about her passing. She seemed like a very brave woman. 6 weeks ago. Margaret had been talking to the FBI, and now she was dead. Detective Santos, are you saying my aunt was working with law enforcement? I'm saying your Aunt Margaret provided us with preliminary information that corroborated evidence we'd already gathered independently. Mr. Chen's name has come up in connection with several fraudulent charities operating out of the Bahamas and Cayman Islands. Patricia was listening to my side of the conversation, her face growing paler by the minute. She scribbled a note and pushed it across the desk. Don't say anything about the evidence yet. Ma'am, would you be available to meet with federal agents this afternoon? We understand this is a difficult time, but if you have additional materials that belong to your aunt. I looked at the folder spread across Patricia's desk. Bank records, forged documents, private investigator reports, everything Margaret had died trying to expose. Detective, is Richard Chen in immediate danger of fleeing the country? The pause stretched long enough to answer my question. Ma'am, I really can't discuss operational details, but I would strongly advise you not to meet with Mr. Chen alone. My dinner reservation with Richard was in 8 hours. I'll call you back, I said, hanging up before Detective Santos could respond. Patricia was already pulling up something on her computer. Sarah, look at this. Richard Chen, registered as owner of Bermuda International Holdings as of March 2023. That's the company mentioned in those email exchanges. What does that mean? It means he's not just stealing from family trusts. He's running the entire operation. She clicked through several more screens. Elena Vasquez, listed as Chief Financial Officer. They incorporated in Bermuda specifically to avoid U.S. banking regulations. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard, running a bit late, but still on for Lou Bernardine tonight. Elena's flying in from Barcelona, excited for you two to finally meet. She's heard so much about you, Elena was coming to New York. The woman who'd been spending stolen money for 3 years was going to sit across from me at dinner, probably wearing jewelry purchased with Dad's medical fund. I stood up abruptly. Patricia, I need you to do 3 things. Call Detective Santos back and tell her I have Margaret's complete files. Set up a meeting with Judge Morrison for first thing tomorrow morning. And find me the best criminal attorney in New York who can meet with us tonight after 10 p.m. Sarah, what are you planning? I gathered Margaret's folders, my hands completely steady now. I'm going to dinner with my uncle. And I'm going to record every word he says. Patricia grabbed my wrist before I could reach the door. Absolutely not. Sarah, if Richard suspects you know anything, you could be in real danger. Margaret died 5 days before she was supposed to meet with me about urgent legal action. That timing isn't coincidental. I pulled free, but her words stopped me cold. You think Richard killed Margaret? I think your aunt was a healthy 62-year-old woman who died suddenly of a heart attack right before exposing a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The medical examiner's report showed traces of digitalis in her system. Digitalis? Heart medication that's essentially undetectable if you're not looking for it. Causes cardiac arrest in high doses. Patricia's voice was grim. Margaret wasn't on any heart medications, Sarah. I asked her doctor. The room tilted sideways. I sank back into the chair, Margaret's folders scattered across my lap. He murdered her. He actually murdered Margaret to keep her quiet. We don't know that for certain, but Detective Santos clearly has suspicions or she wouldn't have warned you about meeting Richard alone. Patricia was already dialing her phone. I'm calling the FBI field office directly. You're not going anywhere near Lou Bernardine tonight. But I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Richard expected me at dinner in 6 hours, probably planning to charm me with stories about Dad while stealing the memorial fund money. If I didn't show, he'd know something was wrong. He might disappear to the Cayman Islands with Elena, taking all the evidence with him. What if I wore a wire? Patricia nearly dropped her phone. What if you what? Detective Santos said they've been building a case for 18 months. They need Richard to incriminate himself on record, right? If I can get him to admit what he did to Dad, to Margaret. Sarah, you're talking about confronting a man who's killed at least 2 people to protect his secrets. This isn't some movie where the brave niece gets justice by playing amateur detective. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized, Jennifer, my cousin whose college fund Richard had stolen. Sarah. I just heard about Aunt Margaret's safety deposit box from Mom. Did you find anything interesting? Jennifer's voice was bright, unsuspecting. She had no idea that Richard was the reason she'd had to drop out of Stanford. Jen, where are you right now? At work. Why? You sound weird. Which work? The restaurant or the tutoring job? Jennifer had been working 3 jobs since dropping out of college, trying to pay off student loans for an education she'd never finished. Both, actually. Double shift at Romano's until 6, then tutoring until 10. Why are you asking? Romano's. The restaurant where I was supposed to meet Richard for lunch yesterday before he changed it to dinner at Lou Bernardine. Which meant Jennifer would be working when Richard expected to see me. Jen, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not, under any circumstances, go to work today. Call in sick right now. Sarah, what the hell is wrong with you? I can't afford to call in sick. I've got rent due Monday and... Jennifer. My voice was sharp enough to cut through her protests. Your college fund wasn't lost to bad investments. It was stolen. By Richard. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. What did you just say? I looked at Patricia, who was shaking her head frantically, then at the bank statements showing Jennifer's $127,000 education fund transferred to Richard's personal account in 2018. I found proof, Jen. Richard has been stealing from all of us for years. He killed Dad by taking the medical money. He probably killed Margaret to keep her quiet. That's impossible. Uncle Rich helped me apply for student loans when the fund ran out. He felt terrible about the market crash affecting my education money. There was no market crash. He stole it and bought his girlfriend a yacht. Patricia grabbed the phone from my hand. Jennifer, this is Patricia Wong, Margaret's attorney. Don't go to work today. Don't go home either. Is there somewhere safe you can stay where Richard wouldn't think to look for you? I could hear Jennifer crying through the speaker. I don't understand. Uncle Rich has been helping me with my loan payments. He sends me money every month. Guilt money, I said, taking the phone back. He's been sending you a fraction of what he stole to keep you grateful and unsuspecting. Sarah, Patricia whispered urgently, Detective Santos is calling me back on the other line. I answered Jennifer's questions as quickly as possible while Patricia took the FBI call. Yes, I had proof. No, she shouldn't confront Richard. Yes, we'd get her money back, but first we had to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. When Patricia hung up, her face was white. They'd been watching Richard for 3 weeks. He's booked on a flight to Barcelona tomorrow night, one way. Elena transferred $8 million to a Swiss account yesterday morning. He's running. Which means tonight at Lou Bernardine isn't a celebration dinner. It's a goodbye. The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan felt like stepping into a different universe, all glass and steel efficiency, nothing like the warm chaos of Margaret's house where I'd grown up. Agent Rebecca Torres was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as she reviewed Margaret's files. Your aunt was meticulous, Agent Torres said, spreading the bank statements across a conference table. We've been trying to trace these Cayman accounts for 8 months. She handed us a roadmap. Detective Santos had driven up from Miami overnight, bringing her own thick folder of evidence. Richard Chen's operation goes far beyond family theft, she explained. We've identified at least 12 charitable organizations where he's diverted funds. The Riverside Children's Hospital alone lost $2.3 million that should have funded pediatric surgeries. I thought about Margaret's note, 2 children dead waiting for operations that Richard's theft had prevented. How many people has he killed? That's what we're trying to determine. Agent Torres pulled up a computer screen showing a timeline that made my stomach lurch. The Hartwell Foundation lost their entire emergency fund in 2020, money earmarked for disaster relief. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico that year, they couldn't provide the medical supplies they promised. We're still calculating casualties. The scope was breathtaking. Richard hadn't just destroyed my family, he'd been quietly murdering people across the country for over a decade. Which brings us to tonight, Detective Santos said. You can't go to that dinner, Sarah. Richard's booked on Iberia flight 6127 tomorrow at 11:47 p.m. If he suspects we're closing in, he'll disappear, I finished. But if I don't show up, won't that tip him off anyway? Agent Torres leaned forward. We've been monitoring his communications. He's already nervous. Elena's been pushing him to leave the country for weeks. One wrong move and we lose him forever. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Sarah, honey, slight change of plans. Can you meet us at the apartment first for drinks? Elena's excited to show you photos from Barcelona. We're at 847 Fifth Avenue, penthouse. See you at 6:30. The three women stared at my phone screen. Agent Torres was the first to speak. That's not Lou Bernardine. He's moved the meeting to a private location. The penthouse Elena supposedly owns, I said, remembering the private investigator's report. Purchased with money from Mom's life insurance. Detective Santos was already making calls, her voice urgent as she coordinated with the Manhattan field office. But Agent Torres kept studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. She pulled out a manila folder I hadn't seen before. Margaret didn't just die of a heart attack. The medical examiner found traces of oleander extract in her blood, a plant toxin that mimics digitalis. Plant toxin? Specifically, from white oleander. Highly poisonous, virtually undetectable unless you're looking for it. Agent Torres opened the folder, revealing crime scene photos from Margaret's house. Your aunt had a beautiful garden, but no oleander plants. However, Richard's property in Martha's Vineyard? Oleander hedges line the entire driveway. The room went silent except for Detective Santos's phone conversation in the background. I stared at the photos of Margaret's garden, roses, hydrangeas, the vegetable patch where she'd taught me to grow tomatoes when I was 13. No white oleander anywhere. He brought the poison with him, I whispered. We think so. Margaret's neighbor saw Richard's car in her driveway the morning she died. He told the responding officers he'd stopped by to check on her, found her unconscious, called 911. Perfect cover. My hands were shaking again. He sat with her while she died. Probably held her hand and told her everything would be okay. Agent Torres nodded grimly. Which means he knows exactly what evidence Margaret had gathered. He's expecting you to be ignorant of everything, just the greeting me settling her aunt's estate. Detective Santos finished her call and rejoined us at the table. NYPD has units positioned around the Fifth Avenue building, but they can't move without probable cause. If Richard's planning to flee tomorrow night, tonight might be our only chance to get him on record. You want me to wear a wire? We want you to consider it, Agent Torres corrected carefully. But Sarah, you need to understand the risks. Richard has killed at least twice to protect his operation. If he realizes you know the truth. I looked at the timeline spread across the conference table, 15 years of systematic theft and murder, all authorized by the man who'd taught me to ride a bicycle and taken me to Mets games when Dad was too sick for outings. The man who'd cried at Dad's funeral while knowing he'd caused his death. What would I need to get him to say? Agent Torres exchanged glances with Detective Santos. Admission that he controlled the trust funds. Acknowledgement that he knew about your father's medical bills. Any reference to Margaret's investigation or her death. And Elena? If we can prove she's been actively laundering the stolen funds through her Barcelona accounts, we can hold her as an accessory. Detective Santos pulled out her own phone. The wire technology is sophisticated now, virtually undetectable. But you'd need to keep them talking for at least 30 minutes to get everything we need. 30 minutes in a penthouse apartment with two murderers who were planning to disappear forever in less than 24 hours. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Richard. Bring an overnight bag if you want, sweetheart. Elena suggested you might enjoy staying in the city tonight. We could make it a real celebration of your dad's memory. The three of us stared at the message. Agent Torres spoke first. He's not planning to let you leave. The wire felt like a cold spider against my ribs, hidden beneath a navy blazer Agent Torres had insisted I wear. Thicker fabric muffles the transmission, she'd explained while the tech specialist taped the device to my skin. But it also means you need to stay close to them when they're talking. 847 Fifth Avenue loomed above me like a glass monument to Richard's stolen empire. According to Margaret's files, the penthouse had cost $4.2 million, money that should have funded the Morrison Children's Hospital's new cardiac wing. I thought about that as the elevator climbed silently toward the 42nd floor, my reflection staring back from the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at me didn't look like someone walking into a trap. Agent Torres had coached me for 2 hours on maintaining normal body language, keeping my voice steady, asking the right questions without seeming suspicious. But my hands were steady now in a way that surprised me. Maybe this was what Margaret had felt like during those 4 years of investigation, the calm that comes from finally knowing the truth. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, all marble and modern art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Richard was waiting with a glass of champagne, wearing the same warm smile he'd given me at Dad's funeral. Sarah, sweetheart. He pulled me into a hug that made my skin crawl. You look beautiful. Margaret would be so proud. Over his shoulder, I could see Elena emerging from what looked like a kitchen, carrying a tray of appetizers. She was smaller than I'd expected from the private investigator's photos, elegant in an understated way that spoke of real money. Old money. Not the stolen kind. You must be Sarah, Elena said, her accent barely detectable. Richard talks about you constantly. I feel like I know you already. She had no idea. According to the FBI's financial records, Elena had been unknowingly spending blood money for 3 years. The question was whether she'd figured it out yet, and if so, whether she cared. This place is incredible, I said, accepting the champagne and looking around the apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park that probably cost $1,000 a month just to look at. Elena, Richard mentioned you're from Barcelona? Originally, yes. But I've been falling in love with New York. She smiled at Richard with genuine affection that made everything more complicated. Richard's been showing me all his favorite family spots. The restaurant where your parents had their first date, the hospital where you were born. The hospital where Dad died, I thought but didn't say. Richard moved to the windows, gesturing expansively at the view. I wanted to share this with you before we make it official, he said. Elena and I are getting married next month. In Barcelona, at her family's vineyard. Next month. After he disappeared with the stolen money and left the FBI with nothing but empty bank accounts. That's wonderful, I managed. What about the memorial fund? I thought you wanted to discuss expanding Dad's scholarship program. Something flickered across Richard's face, too quick to interpret, but the wire against my ribs felt suddenly heavier. Actually, that's part of what we wanted to talk about tonight. The scholarship fund has grown faster than we expected. We're thinking of moving it offshore, maybe establishing a European branch. More tax advantages that way. Elena was watching this exchange with slightly narrowed eyes, and I realized she understood exactly what Richard was really saying. She knew about the money laundering. She'd probably been helping plan it. Offshore? I kept my voice light, curious rather than suspicious. Like the Cayman Islands accounts you mentioned managing for other family trusts? Richard's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. In the silence that followed, I could hear my heartbeat loud enough that I worried it would interfere with the wire's transmission. I never mentioned Cayman accounts, Richard said slowly. Elena set down her appetizer tray with deliberate precision. Richard, perhaps we should discuss the wedding plans instead. Sarah, would you like to see photos of the vineyard? But Richard was studying my face now with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. Sarah, sweetheart, how exactly did you know about the offshore accounts? Agent Torres had prepared me for this moment, but sitting in Richard's stolen penthouse with two people who'd already committed multiple murders, her coaching felt inadequate. The wire was recording everything, but the FBI couldn't help me if Richard decided I knew too much to leave alive. I just assumed, I said. I mean, you've always been so good with money, managing everyone's trusts and funds. I figured you'd use the most sophisticated options available. Elena was moving toward the kitchen, but her path would take her behind my chair. Every instinct screamed danger, but I forced myself to stay seated, to keep smiling like the naive niece they expected me to be. Richard finally smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're right, of course. I've always tried to maximize returns for the family. He raised his champagne glass in a toast. To David's memory, and to making sure his death wasn't in vain. I lifted my glass, meeting his gaze directly. To making sure Dad gets the justice he deserved. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with double meaning. Richard's smile faltered for just a moment, and I knew that somewhere 42 floors below, Agent Torres was hearing every word. The toast seemed to echo in the marble-lined penthouse, and for a heartbeat, I thought I'd pushed too hard. Richard's eyes were calculating now, studying my face like he was seeing me for the first time. But then Elena returned from the kitchen, carrying what looked like a bottle of expensive wine, and the moment passed. Richard found a 1982 Bordeaux to celebrate, Elena announced, but something in her voice had changed. Cooler. More careful. It's from the year your father graduated college, Sarah. We thought it would be meaningful. I watched her uncork the wine with practiced efficiency, remembering Agent Torres's warning about oleander extract. Colorless, odorless, virtually undetectable in alcohol. Margaret had probably trusted Richard completely right up until her heart stopped beating. That's incredibly thoughtful, I said, not touching the wine glass Elena placed before me. Dad would have loved the symbolism. He always said the best way to honor someone's memory is through action. Richard moved closer to the windows, his reflection ghost-like against the darkening sky. Your father was always philosophical about justice. Even at the end, when the medical bills were overwhelming, he never blamed anyone. Just accepted it as God's will. The casual cruelty of that statement made my vision blur. Dad hadn't died accepting God's will, he'd died believing he was bankrupting his family, rationing his pain medication, asking the doctors to stop treatment because he thought we couldn't afford it. All while Richard had millions of dollars sitting in offshore accounts. I found something interesting while going through Margaret's papers, I said, keeping my voice conversational. Insurance documents from when Mom died. I never realized how much planning she'd done for my education. Elena's wine glass paused at her lips. Richard turned from the windows, his expression carefully neutral. Your mother was very thorough, he said. Though I'm not sure what specific documents you mean. The education trust. $500,000 from her life insurance, managed by you until I turned 25. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check something. I turned 28 last month, so I was wondering about the transfer process. The silence stretched long enough for me to count my heartbeats. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and oblivious to the crimes being planned 42 floors above the street. Richard finally laughed, but it sounded forced. Sarah, honey, I think there might be some confusion. Your mother's life insurance went directly to pay off the mortgage and medical debts. There wasn't anything left for a trust. That's strange, I said, still looking at my phone. Because I have paperwork showing a trust account opened at Delacroix, Martinez and Associates in 2012. With my signature authorizing withdrawals. I looked up at him directly. Funny thing is, the signature is dated when I was supposedly 21, but I would have been 19 then. Still a minor. Elena set her wine glass down with a sharp click against the marble table. Richard, perhaps we should. No, Richard interrupted, his voice harder now. I think Sarah has more questions. Don't you, sweetheart? The endearment sounded like a threat. I could feel the wire against my ribs, recording every word, but Agent Torres felt impossibly far away. The elevator was across the foyer, 30 feet that might as well have been 30 miles if Richard decided I knew too much. I guess I'm just confused about the timeline, I said. Margaret mentioned something about delayed trust payments affecting Dad's treatment options. But if the money was already gone. Margaret talked too much, Richard said quietly. Elena was moving again, circling behind my chair with fluid grace. In the window's reflection, I could see her reach into a serving drawer, her hand emerging with something that glinted silver in the apartment's recessed lighting. My phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, I glanced down to see Agent Torres' number, NYPD moving now. Keep talking. But when I looked up, Richard was smiling again, the warm, familiar expression that had comforted me through Dad's funeral and Margaret's memorial service. Except now I could see what I'd missed before, the calculation behind his eyes, the predator's patience. You know, Sarah, he said conversationally, you look so much like your father when you're thinking hard. He had that same expression in the hospital, right before he asked me to handle all the medical billing. Richard moved closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he'd used when reading eulogies. He trusted me completely. Right up until the end. The admission hung in the air like poison. Richard had just confessed to manipulating Dad in his final moments, and the wire was capturing every word. But Elena was behind me now, and the silver object in her hand caught the light as she moved. Dad trusted you, I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. Even when the payments started getting delayed. Even when Johns Hopkins began threatening to discontinue treatment. Richard's smile widened. Your father was always naive about money. Just like Margaret. He moved to pour himself more wine, the motion casual despite the menace in his voice. Though Margaret got suspicious toward the end. Started asking uncomfortable questions about transaction dates, account numbers. Is that why you visited her the morning she died? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Richard's hand stilled on the wine bottle, and Elena's movement behind my chair ceased entirely. The apartment fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. That's a very specific question, Sarah, Richard said slowly. What exactly do you think you know? My phone was buzzing insistently in my lap, probably Agent Torres trying to warn me about something, but I couldn't look away from Richard's face. The mask of familial warmth had finally slipped completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. I know about the oleander extract, I said. White oleander from your Martha's Vineyard garden. Margaret never grew oleander. Elena laughed suddenly, the sound sharp and bitter. I told you she was too smart, Richard. Just like the aunt. Her accent was thicker now, stress bleeding through her careful English. We should have left yesterday. Elena, Richard's voice carried a warning, but she ignored it. No, I'm tired of pretending. She moved around to face me directly, and I could see the silver object was a letter opener, its blade thin and sharp. Your precious Aunt Margaret called the Barcelona consulate 6 weeks ago, asking about Richard's business connections. We knew she was investigating. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. You killed her to buy time to steal the memorial fund money. We didn't kill anyone, Richard said, but his tone suggested semantics rather than truth. Margaret had a heart condition. The stress of her investigation simply accelerated the inevitable. Stress from oleander poisoning. Elena stepped closer, the letter opener held casually but ready. You Americans always want things spelled out clearly. Yes, Richard visited his sister-in-law with flowers from our garden. Yes, Margaret's heart stopped a few hours later. But technically, she died of cardiac arrest. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see flashing lights on Fifth Avenue far below, NYPD units taking position around the building. But 42 floors was a long way for help to travel, and Elena was close enough now that I could smell her expensive perfume. The memorial fund, I said, trying to keep them talking while the FBI coordinated their response. How much are you planning to steal before you disappear? All of it, Richard said matter-of-factly. The scholarship account, the remaining trust balances, even your mother's insurance settlement that you never received. 8.7 million total, transferred to Swiss accounts this afternoon. My mother's insurance money, gone. Dad's memorial fund, stolen. Margaret's life savings that she'd left to me, already converted to untraceable cryptocurrency according to Elena's satisfied smile. Iberia flight 6127 tomorrow night, I said. Barcelona, then Switzerland. Richard's expression shifted to genuine surprise. How could you possibly know our flight information? Before I could answer, Elena grabbed my shoulder with her free hand, the letter opener's blade pressing against my neck just below my ear. Because she's wearing a wire, you fool. Can't you hear it? The slight static when she breathes? The apartment's elevator chimed softly in the distance, NYPD finally reaching the 42nd floor. But Elena's blade was sharp enough to sever my carotid artery before Agent Torres could cross the marble foyer. FBI. The shout echoed through the penthouse as tactical officers poured through the elevator doors. Drop your weapons. Elena's grip tightened on my shoulder, the letter opener drawing a thin line of blood. Tell them to back away, or she dies just like the aunt. But Richard was already moving toward the windows, his hand reaching for something hidden behind the wine cabinet. As he turned, I could see what Margaret had spent 4 years trying to expose, not just a thief, but a killer who would murder his own family to protect his stolen empire. The wire against my ribs captured Richard's final words before the tactical team's flashbang grenades turned the penthouse into chaos. I should have killed you years ago, just like I should have killed David directly instead of letting cancer do it slowly. Dad's name on his murderer's lips was the last thing I heard before the world exploded into light and sound. The tactical team's flashbang turned the world into white noise and ringing silence. I felt Elena's grip loosen as she stumbled backward, the letter opener clattering across the marble floor. Through the chaos of shouting officers and scrambling bodies, I caught a glimpse of Richard diving behind the wine cabinet, his hand closing around what looked like a chrome briefcase. Sarah, get down. Agent Torres' voice cut through the confusion as I dropped to my knees, my hands instinctively covering my ears. The wire was still transmitting. I could hear the feedback squeal as tactical radios interfered with the signal. Elena was on the ground now, 3 officers surrounding her with weapons drawn, but she was laughing, actually laughing, as they zip-tied her wrists behind her back. You're too late, she called out, her voice carrying over the tactical chatter. The transfers completed 2 hours ago. $8.7 million, scattered across 14 accounts in 6 countries. Her accent was fully thick now, dropping all pretense of careful English. Good luck getting extradition from Switzerland. Agent Torres appeared beside me, helping me to my feet while keeping her weapon trained on the wine cabinet where Richard had taken cover. Are you injured? I touched my neck where Elena's blade had drawn blood. I'm okay. But Richard said something about killing Dad directly instead of letting cancer do it. There might be more than just the trust fund theft. We heard everything, Torres confirmed. The wire picked up his confession about the oleander, the trust manipulation, even the flight information. That's enough for murder charges. A crash from behind the wine cabinet made everyone freeze. Detective Santos was coordinating with the tactical team leader, their voices urgent but controlled. He's got access to the building's service elevator from the kitchen, she reported. Built-in escape route. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see more flashing lights arriving on Fifth Avenue, FBI vehicles, additional NYPD units, even what looked like federal marshals taking positions around the building's exits. Margaret's 4 years of patient investigation had finally triggered the largest financial crimes bust in New York's recent history. Richard. Agent Torres called out, her voice echoing off the marble walls. You're surrounded. The building is locked down, and we have units on every floor. There's nowhere to run. There's always somewhere to run when you have enough money. Richard's voice drifted back from behind the cabinet. Ask Elena about the Zurich accounts. Elena had stopped laughing, but her expression remained defiant even with 3 assault rifles pointed at her chest. The beauty of cryptocurrency, Agent Torres, is that it moves faster than your legal system. By the time you get court orders, our money will have changed hands 6 times across 3 continents. But I was thinking about something else, Richard's chrome briefcase and his confident tone despite being trapped in a penthouse 42 floors above street level. The private investigator's report had mentioned Richard's obsession with contingency plans, multiple escape routes for every scenario. Agent Torres, I said quietly, what if this penthouse isn't his only property in the building? She frowned, following my logic. You think he owns multiple units? Elena said there's always somewhere to run with enough money. And Richard's had 15 years to prepare for this moment. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through Margaret's property records until I found what I was looking for. Here, Unit 3847, registered under Bermuda International Holdings. Same building, 39 floors down. Detective Santos was already coordinating with building security, her voice sharp with urgency. We need floor plans for units ending in 47. Now. The realization hit all of us simultaneously. Richard hadn't been planning to escape down, he'd been planning to escape through. The chrome briefcase probably contained rope, climbing gear, maybe even a base jumping setup. With the FBI focused on ground-level exits, a rooftop escape would be unexpected enough to work. Elena's laughter started up again, confirming our fears. You really think like Americans, she taunted. So linear. Richard doesn't run from buildings, he flies off them. Agent Torres was already shouting orders into her radio, coordinating with helicopter units and rooftop tactical teams. But as we spoke, I could hear sounds from above us, footsteps on what must have been a concealed staircase leading to the roof access. Margaret had spent 4 years gathering evidence against a man who'd planned his crimes decades in advance. Even now, surrounded by federal agents with his confession recorded and his assets frozen, Richard was still 3 moves ahead of law enforcement. Through the penthouse windows, the lights of Manhattan glittered like scattered evidence, beautiful, complex, and impossible to gather quickly enough to prevent one more escape. The wire against my ribs kept recording as tactical officers stormed toward the hidden staircase, documenting the final moments of a 15-year investigation that might still end with Richard Chin disappearing into the night sky above New York City. The sounds from the staircase above us grew fainter, confirming my worst fears. Richard was already making his way to the roof while we'd been focused on Elena's taunts about Swiss bank accounts. Agent Torres was coordinating with air support, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. 15 years of financial crimes, 2 murders, and he might still slip away into the Manhattan night. How long until the helicopters arrive? I asked, watching Elena smirk from her position on the floor. 6 minutes, Torres replied grimly. More than enough time for someone with climbing experience. Elena's smirk widened. Richard's been base jumping for 12 years. Practiced off our yacht in Barcelona every summer. She looked directly at me with cold satisfaction. Your uncle is more resourceful than your simple American minds can comprehend. But as the tactical team secured the penthouse, something Elena said earlier kept nagging at me. The transfers had completed 2 hours ago, which meant Richard and Elena had been moving money while I was still meeting with the FBI downtown. If they'd been planning to disappear tonight anyway, why had Richard insisted on this dinner? Agent Torres, I said suddenly, what if this isn't an escape? What if it's something else? She paused in her radio coordination. What do you mean? I thought about Richard's behavior over the past hour, too calm, too willing to confess, almost like he'd wanted his crimes recorded. He admitted to everything. The oleander poisoning, the trust theft, even manipulating Dad in the hospital. Why would he give us a full confession if he was planning to escape? Detective Santos appeared beside us, having overheard my question. Because he's not planning to escape, she said slowly. He's planning to tie up loose ends. The realization hit me like ice water. Richard hadn't brought me here to celebrate or to say goodbye, he brought me here to eliminate the last witness to his crimes. Elena might know about the financial theft, but only I had Margaret's complete investigation files. Only I could connect him to specific victims, specific deaths. The overnight bag, I whispered, remembering his final text message. He suggested I bring an overnight bag because he never planned to let me leave alive. Agent Torres was already moving toward the tactical team leader, her voice urgent. We need rooftop units now. This isn't an escape attempt, it's a murder-suicide scenario. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the first police helicopter approaching from the south, its spotlight cutting through the darkness above Central Park. But 42 floors was a lot of vertical space for a man with climbing gear and a 15-year head start on planning his exit strategy. Elena's voice carried across the marble floor, speaking in rapid Spanish to someone on what must have been a concealed phone. Detective Santos moved to intercept the call, but I caught enough fragments to understand. Elena was confirming final account transfers, not coordinating Richard's escape. She's still moving money, I told Torres. Even with Richard on the roof, she's completing the financial escape plan. Torres grabbed Elena's phone, ending the call mid-sentence. But Elena just smiled wider, completely unafraid despite being surrounded by federal agents with enough evidence to ensure life sentences. You can stop the calls, Elena said calmly, but you cannot stop the blockchain. Cryptocurrency moves at the speed of light, Agent Torres. Our Swiss accounts are already empty, redistributed to wallets you will never trace. Outside, the helicopter spotlight found the building's roof, illuminating a figure in dark clothing rappelling down the building's north face with professional efficiency. Richard had planned this escape route with the same meticulous attention to detail that had hidden his crimes for 15 years. Margaret's 4-year investigation was about to watch its primary target disappear into the Manhattan night, taking $8.7 million in stolen funds and the truth about at least 2 murders with him. The wire against my ribs captured my whispered realization, he's going to get away with everything. The helicopter spotlight tracked Richard's descent down the building's north face, but something was wrong with his trajectory. Instead of rappelling toward the street level where a getaway vehicle might be waiting, he was moving laterally, toward the adjacent building's rooftop. He's not escaping, I said, watching his dark figure swing through the spotlight beam. He's repositioning. Agent Torres followed my gaze, her expression shifting from frustration to alarm. The Meridian Tower. Residential building, minimal security. She was already coordinating with a tactical team. If he gets inside that building. 800 potential hostages, Detective Santos finished grimly. But Elena was laughing again from her position on the floor, and this time her amusement seemed genuinely delighted rather than defiant. You still don't understand Richard at all, she called out. He's not taking hostages. He's retrieving insurance. What insurance? Torres demanded. The hard drives, of course. 15 years of evidence doesn't just disappear because you found Margaret's little investigation. Elena's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. Every transaction, every forged document, every communications record, it's all backed up in a climate-controlled vault 3 blocks from here. My blood went cold as I understood what she meant. Margaret's files were damning, but they only covered Richard's theft from family trusts. If he had comprehensive records of his entire operation, all the charity frauds, all the offshore accounts, all the victims, that information would be worth millions to the right buyers. He's not running away, I whispered. He's going shopping. Agent Torres was already shouting orders, coordinating with units across Manhattan. But Richard had a 15-minute head start and intimate knowledge of every building in this neighborhood. The Meridian Tower connected to the subway system through its basement parking garage. From there, he could disappear into the tunnels beneath the city. Agent Torres, Detective Santos called out, studying Elena's confiscated phone. The last call she made wasn't to a bank. It was to a private jet company. There's a helicopter waiting at the East River heliport, fueled and ready for immediate departure. Elena's smile faltered for the first time since the tactical team had arrived. That information is privileged, she said quickly. Not anymore. Torres grabbed the phone, scrolling through recent messages. Falcon Charter Services, helicopter N247 Delta, flight plan filed for Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. From there, it's a private jet to Montreal, then Barcelona. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying efficiency. Richard rappels to the adjacent building, retrieves his insurance files from the storage vault, then disappears via helicopter while the FBI focuses on ground-level exits around his penthouse building. But as Torres coordinated the response, I noticed something that made my heart race. Elena's phone showed a text message thread that was still active, automated confirmations from various financial institutions, all timestamped within the last 30 minutes. The money transfers aren't finished, I said, grabbing Torres' arm. Look at these confirmations. He's still moving funds in real time. Torres studied the messages, her expression darkening. These are completion confirmations for the Swiss accounts. But Sarah, these amounts. She showed me the screen. This isn't 8.7 million. These transfers total over $40 million. Elena had gone very still on the marble floor, no longer laughing or taunting us. For the first time since the tactical team arrived, she looked genuinely afraid. 40 million, I repeated numbly. How is that possible? Because your uncle didn't just steal from family trusts and charities, Detective Santos said, reviewing additional messages on Elena's phone. According to these confirmations, he's been systematically emptying the pension funds of 6 major corporations. The Morrison Foundation was just the tip of the iceberg. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered with thousands of lights, each one representing people whose retirement savings Richard had methodically stolen over 15 years. Margaret's investigation had uncovered a serial killer, but Richard Chen was something far worse, a financial terrorist who'd been quietly destroying lives across the entire East Coast. The wire against my ribs kept recording as the scope of his crimes expanded beyond anything we'd imagined, and somewhere in the darkness below, Richard was still moving toward his final escape with enough stolen money to disappear forever. The helicopter's searchlight had lost Richard completely. Agent Torres was coordinating with ground units, but I could see the frustration building in her voice as each radio check came back negative. He vanished into the maze of Manhattan's rooftops like he'd been planning this exact scenario for years. Which, I realized with growing dread, he probably had. Elena, I said, kneeling beside her zip-tied form on the marble floor. The storage vault Richard's heading for, it's not just backup files, is it? Her defiant smirk had returned now that Richard had successfully evaded the initial pursuit. You're finally asking better questions, little Sarah. Agent Torres moved closer, her weapon still drawn. What's in the vault, Elena? Everything, Elena said simply. 15 years of insurance policies. Not just financial records, personal information on every victim, every family member, every potential witness. Her eyes fixed on mine with cold calculation. Including detailed surveillance records on Margaret's daily routines, her medical appointments, even her grocery shopping schedule. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Richard hadn't just poisoned Margaret impulsively, he'd been stalking her for months, planning the perfect moment to eliminate her threat. Jesus Christ, Detective Santos breathed. He's got files on all of us. Elena nodded with obvious satisfaction. Birth certificates, social security numbers, medical histories, financial records. Richard's been preparing for this day since 2019. Every family member, every federal agent who might investigate him, every prosecutor who might build a case. She looked directly at Agent Torres. Did you really think your daughter's private school records were secure, Rebecca? Torres went white. How do you know about my daughter? Madison Torres, age 7, Riverside Elementary School. Walks to school every Tuesday with her babysitter, Sarah Kim. Elena's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Richard's been maintaining active surveillance on the families of 12 federal agents for the past 4 years. Insurance, in case investigations got too close. The apartment fell silent except for radio chatter from the tactical team still searching the surrounding buildings. But I was thinking about something else. If Richard had been surveilling federal agents since 2019, how had he known to target Torres specifically? Agent Torres, I said slowly, when did the FBI first open an investigation into Richard's activities? She frowned, consulting her notes. The Morrison Foundation case started 18 months ago, but we didn't connect it to Richard until. 4 years ago, I interrupted, remembering Margaret's timeline. Margaret first contacted the Miami field office 4 years ago. Which means Richard's been monitoring law enforcement response since the moment Margaret made that initial call. Detective Santos was studying Elena's confiscated phone again, her expression growing more alarmed by the minute. There are GPS tracking applications here, she reported. Active monitoring on vehicles registered to at least 15 different people. She looked up at Torres. Your personal car has been tracked for 3 years, Rebecca. The scope of Richard's preparation was staggering. He hadn't just been stealing money, he'd been building a comprehensive intelligence operation, treating his own family like enemy combatants in a war we didn't know we were fighting. The storage vault, I said, understanding finally dawning. It's not just evidence he can sell. It's leverage he can use. Elena's smile widened. Now you're thinking like Richard. Why disappear with $40 million when you can stay invisible and keep stealing? Those surveillance files contain enough blackmail material to ensure cooperation from dozens of families, federal agents, even judges. Through the penthouse windows, I could see police units spreading across Manhattan like a search grid, but they were looking for a fugitive when they should have been hunting a ghost. Richard Chin wasn't planning to flee the country, he was planning to disappear into plain sight, using stolen identities and compromised officials to rebuild his empire somewhere new. Margaret's 4-year investigation had uncovered a monster, but we were still thinking too small. Richard wasn't just a serial killer or financial terrorist. He was a one-man criminal organization that had been preparing for war against law enforcement since the day Margaret first suspected the truth. The storage vault Richard was targeting wasn't 3 blocks away, it was directly beneath us. Elena, I said, the realization hitting me like ice water. The Meridian Tower isn't where he's going. It's where he's been. This building, 847, 5th Avenue, you own multiple units here, don't you? Her confident smirk faltered for just a moment, but it was enough. Agent Torres was already on her radio. I need building schematics for 847, 5th Avenue, all floors. Focus on basement levels and storage areas. She grabbed Elena by the shoulders. How many units does Richard control in this building? It doesn't matter, Elena said, but her voice had lost its mocking tone. You'll never find the vault in time. This building has 17 basement levels, most of them sealed since the 1940s. Detective Santos appeared beside us, Elena's phone in her hand. The GPS tracker just went active again. Richard's not in the Meridian Tower, he's directly below us, descending through this building's service levels. I thought about Richard's chrome briefcase, his confident escape plan, the way he positioned himself behind the wine cabinet with perfect knowledge of the penthouse's layout. He's been using this building as his headquarters for years. The penthouse was never Elena's apartment, it was his command center. Exactly, Elena said, her defiance crumbling as she realized we'd figured out her deception. Floors 38 through 42, all connected by private elevator. The vault is on sublevel B12, climate-controlled, biometric security. Agent Torres was coordinating tactical teams to sweep the building's lower levels, but Richard had a 20-minute head start and intimate knowledge of every corridor, every stairwell, every maintenance tunnel in a building he'd essentially owned for over a decade. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number, but when I answered, Richard's voice was calm and conversational. Hello, sweetheart. Torres frantically gestured for me to keep him talking while she traced the signal. Uncle Rich, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. It's over. The FBI has all of Margaret's evidence, Elena's in custody, and your bank accounts are frozen. Some of them, he agreed pleasantly. But not the important ones. Did you know, Sarah, that your Aunt Margaret visited your father's grave every Sunday for 2 years after he died? Same time, same routine. I used to watch her from the parking area, making sure she never suspected I was there. The casual admission made my stomach lurch. Richard had been stalking Margaret at Dad's graveside, probably planning her murder while she mourned his victim. She knew you killed him, I said. Eventually, yes. Margaret was always too smart for her own good. Just like you're being right now. His voice carried a note of genuine sadness that was somehow worse than threats. I never wanted to hurt family, Sarah. But $40 million creates its own momentum. Through the penthouse windows, I could see SWAT teams entering the building's main lobby, but Richard's voice sounded like he was calling from somewhere much deeper underground. The storage vault, I said. What happens when you reach it? I disappear, Richard said simply. New identity, new country, new life. Elena thinks we're going to Switzerland, but I've been planning something much more permanent. There was a pause. I'm sorry you got involved, sweetheart. Margaret should have minded her own business. She was protecting Dad's memory. David's dead, Sarah. He's been dead for 3 years. Margaret died for nothing, and now you're going to. The line went silent. Agent Torres looked at her tracing equipment, confusion spreading across her face. Signal terminated, she reported. But not from his end. Something cut the connection. Detective Santos was monitoring building security feeds on a tablet. Got him, she said grimly. Sublevel B12, approaching a reinforced door marked private storage. But Agent Torres. She turned the tablet screen toward us. He's not alone. On the grainy security footage, I could see Richard's figure in the underground corridor. But behind him, moving with tactical precision, were 3 men in dark clothing carrying what looked like military-grade equipment. Elena started laughing again from the floor. Did you think Richard worked alone for 15 years? The Delacroix organization didn't dissolve, it went underground. Richard Chin wasn't just escaping with stolen money and blackmail files. He was meeting with the criminal network that had helped him launder funds and eliminate witnesses for over a decade. Margaret's investigation hadn't just uncovered one murderer, it had stumbled into an entire criminal enterprise that had been operating beneath Manhattan for years. But as I watched the security feed, Richard stopped at the vault door and looked directly up at the camera. Even through the grainy footage, I could see his expression clearly. He was smiling. And he was holding up a device that looked exactly like the detonator he'd taken from his chrome briefcase upstairs. Agent Torres, I whispered, I think we need to evacuate this building. Now. The storage vault wasn't just Richard's escape route. It was his insurance policy against ever being caught alive.